Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is Alleviating Compassion Fatigue When Caring Becomes Difficult as part of the AEE COVID-19 webinar series. I'm Sherry Bagley. I'm the director of AEE, the Association for Experiential Education. And we've been running this webinar series to try to get some information and support out there for our members and our community. We have enjoyed having everybody and seeing people and talking to so many different people and offering all this information. Our website has all of our previously recorded webinars, as well as for this series, but as well as ones from previous series. So there's a lot of information at our website, and I'm going to type it into the chat box right now, and we'll have that information up. We also have a resource library on the website, so if you're looking for information around COVID, whether it be mental health or what to do with your participants or how to get your kids outside, any of those things, we have a lot of resources collected on there. Anna's also put into our chat about our membership and all of our contact information. So please feel free to check out the website and use the resources, and let us know if there's anything else you all need. We are really here for you in this time, and these webinars have been provided to give you all support and help you. But if you need to make connections, let us know. We're also holding roundtable meetings. So we have one coming up on Monday that's specifically for K through 12 educators. We'll have one every Monday for the foreseeable future at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And it's just a chance for our community to get together and talk and just exchange ideas and information. So in addition to the webinars, we have the roundtables, and we'd love to see you all there. And yeah, so today, Fred has put up some of our Zoom webinar guidelines, just in case you all haven't been to a Zoom webinar yet, but at this point I feel like most folks have. Everyone is muted and your camera is also off. So no worries about if you have a dog barking or anything like that in the background. The webinars are being recorded and will be available to you in an email after, probably takes about 2 or 3 days for that to happen. And they'll be available on the website, as we said. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask in the chat window. Anna and I are going to monitor that, and we can answer things we know about. There's also a Q&A that you can go to at the bottom of the screen, and you can put a question in there. And at the end of this, there'll be an evaluation that pops up that is information for our presenters. So any feedback you can give us is great.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's it. The only other thing was like to, if you can raise your hand too, and Sherry will be monitoring that stuff. And Carl and I will take a break too periodically, and just check in with folks and see where we're at. So actually, before anything else, what I'm going to invite us to do is, in the spirit of one of my friends, Katie Asmus, who's a member of our therapeutic adventure professional group, I was going to invite us just to kind of slow down, right? Because it looks like we're jumping in from all over the world. And so wherever you're at in the world, I just want you to make sure that you take time to slow down right now. And like, let's make time to breathe with each other together, right? The way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna breathe in through our nose, right? And out through our mouth. Welcome. Breathe in through your nose again. And now through your mouth. Hello. And so this time, what I'm going to ask you to do is, as you're breathing in, the first slide is going to come up, right? So breathe in and take your time to let that come onto the screen. And now that it's fully there, take a deep breath out. Hey, so let me share with you this quote here, right? It's from Dr. Patricia Fisher. We are pretty good at dealing with spikes in stress levels as long as we get back to relaxed state. Unfortunately, many people are consistently living with higher levels of chronic stress, and their bodies are simply unable to experience any respite from the pressure. This has consequences. And so this kind of helps us to set the tone for why Carla and I are partly here today, right? When all the pandemic started, Carla and I are pretty good buddies, and so we were checking in with each other. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we made ourselves available to folks, because that was kind of going to feed our soul. And so we wanted to put something together for compassion fatigue. And so we're very grateful when we talk with Sherry there at AE and Christine, who encouraged us to do that, Christine Norton, who encouraged us to do that, to be a part of this community and offer it that way. So good. So again, I thank you for being here. And if nothing else, it gives me the opportunity to collaborate with Carla. And we used to work together for many years, and it's been good to be able to touch base with her for this kind of effort too. Anything else you want to say, Carla, about that?
No, that's good.
All right, cool. So you got this, man. Go.
All right, cool. Something that has always been important for Fred and I, like he mentioned, we've done a lot of presentations together on compassion fatigue, but what's always been true for the both of us is that we really want to make sure that the participants in the trainings feel empowered to take care of themselves while we're spending time together. So the same goes for this call today. So in the heart of AEE, since you're on underneath that platform, and trying to implement some form of experiential activity, if you have a fidget tool and you're in a safe space and you can reach for one, go ahead and we're going to invite you to do that now. With all the Zoom calls, we do recognize that we do have and hold capacity to stay engaged even while we're kind of mentally, fidgeting with other things. For me personally, it's doodling. So that's perfectly welcomed here in this format. Knowing your exits, understanding we understand this is an open forum, and so people are going to be coming and going. That's great. We just want to let you know that if you are needing any kind of additional resources or something comes up in the presentation that you want to connect with myself or Fred on, obviously we'll have our contact information following this presentation, and then we have Sherry here as a representative from AEE that can also connect you to additional resources as well. More importantly, we really just want to invite everybody to just be present, right? And so taking in only what you need and leaving what you don't. And we're just going to be, encourage just a sense of presence, which is why we started off with some breath work. Since this webinar will point to things like primary trauma and secondary trauma, Fred and I are going to be practicing one of a key strategy really that's used to avoid re-traumatizing, right? And it's called low impact disclosure. And really all what that means is that we're going to be sharing some examples of the impact of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, but we won't be going into any kind of detail about that specific trauma, as we are trying to be mindful of our audience that's coming from different walks of life and all over the world.
And along with that part, we are going to encourage you guys to use the chat, man, not just for question and answer, but even for checking in with folks. And like, there's been a couple of people that I saw online who I haven't talked to in years. So feel free to use that, and just make sure that while you're doing that, you're still practicing that low impact disclosure stuff too, right? So we're not re-triggering other people, but welcome to engage that way. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the ways that we're going to be approaching this webinar. And so I've got a good buddy of mine. His name is Noel Pompa, and he always talks to me about the importance of stop, look, and go. Right. So it's essentially, like, for me, what it means is being deliberate in what you're doing. And so for Carla and me, what we want to do is be deliberate in our approach to this training. And so if we're looking at the stop component of the training being the very first component, it's going to be really coming up with the common language on what exactly we're talking about. And you'll see that in the literature, there's a lot of different ways to approach conversations about compassion fatigue. But what we want to do is provide a solid framework for us to kind of build on. And then the look part is going to be taking a look at some of the assessments that are available to us and some of the different ways of looking internally, like what's going on with us when we're considering the nature of what's happening in our world right now, but also what's happening to ourselves personally, and then to what's happening to the relationships that we share. And then that last part is going to be go, and that's going to be where we're going to come up with some strategies and talk to you a little bit about some of the different frameworks for considering your interactions with folks and your interactions with yourself too, right? To make sure that you're in a good space to show yourself some self-compassion, but also some compassion towards other people too. Anything else, Carla? You got something?
Yeah, good.
Good. All right. You're good.
Cool. All right, cool. So my name is Carla. Thank you, Fred, for inviting me to co-present with you on this topic of compassion fatigue. I'm super excited. Like the slide mentions, I'm in San Antonio. My background is in trauma, working with at-risk populations for abuse and neglect. Fred and I, we worked previously at a children's advocacy center here in San Antonio, and I was first introduced to the field of adventure therapy. So he hired me as his adventure therapist. So that was sort of my first exposures to the field of adventure therapy and AEE and other outdoor behavioral therapy practices. So definitely feel part of the family. Currently, my work right now involves working with content moderators who are exposed to trauma via social media. So there, what I'm doing is just kind of helping to develop and deliver wellness and resiliency curriculum for that population. So excited to be on the call and the webinar. Thanks, Fred, for inviting me.
Yeah, man, it's my treat, dude. Yeah, so good. So like I said, I've had a lot of experience in the trauma field, working with different agencies, like even in high school and college, working with kids. And I didn't even know it at the time, right? But working kids in boys and girls clubs who often were impacted by trauma. So since then until like even my professional career, I've got a lot of experience working with folks who've had some experience with trauma. And so what Carla and I did is when we were working together at the advocacy center, is we started to look at serving people in different ways too, right? So looking at how we can best help professionals who are in this field. And so we developed trainings on secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue and resilience. And so this is kind of an extension of that. And I started my own agency where we're helping to form relationships, right? That's a basis of the company, is making sure that we're making intentional connections with each other so we can achieve like communal goals, whether we're looking at families or we're looking at organizations. What we're trying to do is heal together, get better together, get stronger together. I've served on the AAE's Therapeutic Adventure Professional Group, TAPG, their leadership council, very proudly. It's a great group of folks. And I encourage anybody who's interested in therapeutic adventure, get involved in that group. I've served as their chair on the leadership council, and right now I'm working at the advisory council member, as an advisory council member, and we're developing a certificate in adventure therapy for individuals. And it's more of that to come pretty shortly, but not during this presentation. We're going to talk about something else. Anything else, Carla?
Also, your hair hasn't changed, Fred.
All right. So what we're going to do now is, like, apart from asking you guys to engage in the chat, we're going to kind of get a pulse of like who's here with us. And so Sherry's going to present a poll to you guys, and we want to figure out who's in the room with us, right? So go ahead and take some time here, and then when Sherry's ready, we'll figure out who's in the audience. And this is going to kind of help Carla and me like focus on different parts of the presentation too. This and the next slide. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I got to be careful because I keep wanting to make jokes with you. There's a bunch of people online right now.
You forget there's 76.
I know. That's right. All right, maybe like another 7 seconds, Sherry. That sounds good.
Okay, 57 people have responded. So that's
All right.
Your window of opportunity is slowly closing. Great. I'll close it up. Thank you all. And share the results.
Educators love it.
Awesome.
Love it.
First responders.
Awesome. That's great. My wife is an educator. So definitely got a little bit of self-pause for those guys. Yeah. Thanks for going on, man. And I think like educators, definitely, man, especially working with, well, knowing my wife, right, and working in this field, we know that educators are a very important component of helping kids and people who experience some kind of trauma too. Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah.
Outdoor professionals, thank you for being there.
Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
just along for the ride too. Love it.
Yes,
Love
I love it. All right, cool. All right, let's do this then, right? So good, now that we know that, Carla, take us through this.
it. Okay. All right, cool. So now that we know who's in the room, we're going to take another quick poll here shortly. And what we want to do is just identify and recognize what experience and knowledge is represented here today. And so just take a moment to think about your current understanding or knowledge or awareness of the term compassion fatigue. So no judgment-free zone. There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to get a sense of who's here again. So if you feel fairly proficient in your current understanding, you're going to fall along this black line somewhere, right? And so you'll find yourself somewhere above that white line if you consider yourself to have some understanding and some proficiency in that term compassion fatigue. Or maybe you're even a subject matter expert, then you'll find yourself somewhere near the top of that spectrum of knowledge. And then if you fall just underneath that white line, then maybe you might feel like you know a little bit about this, maybe you've heard about it, but could use some more information or improve on that knowledge base. Or maybe it's a completely new term. So you would find a place marker towards on that spectrum as well.
Okay. Cool. And again, right, judgment-free zone. So, and if you're looking at this graph too, or the spectrum, take a look from left to right too. And so we're wanting to know if people are generally right now like feeling like they're pretty satisfied with their level of compassion, or they've recognized like, man, okay, I got to do a lot better, right? And so we're looking left to right. So on your left, like, man, I could do a lot better. On the right-hand side, man, I'm pretty good. I'm doing pretty good right now. And so think about where you might be standing or where you might be sitting or whatever, right? And like, but we're exactly like you kind of fit here. And we know that, you know, there's probably going to be some days or even some moments where you're crossing from one into the other, but take a snapshot right now and Sherry will put up that poll so we can kind of get a sense for audience now with that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully that was clear for everyone. Let's see here in just a moment.
Let's do 6 seconds for this. All right.
Great.
Where we got purple hands. Okay, cool.
Hmm.
Oh, look, but check it out. It's pretty evenly distributed if we think about some of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, purple hands. Okay, good to know. All right, so maybe what we can do now is, like, again, I invite you inside the chat box, and we'll do this from time to time. Is as you're thinking about where you're at, let us know maybe some stuff that you might want us to tackle. We'll try to monitor that and get to it as we're going through our presentation. Right, you good with that too, Carla?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, good, man. You know, before we move on, I do want to, first of all, just bring recognition to the fact that, yeah, this is happening, right? Where a lot of people are at that point where we're struggling with that compassion stuff. Let's do something about it, and let's practice even doing that stuff together today. Okay, let's do this. So let's start off, since there's a lot of people here who know about this stuff. We may not spend a whole lot of time talking about this, and actually, like, if we're thinking about what this slide represents, we could do like, you know, a couple of retreat, you know, for even just information on this slide. But what we're going to do is just kind of give you a little bit of information about what we're talking about to kind of frame our understanding of compassion fatigue and this thing called empathic strain, so that way we can move forward together. Yeah, and Carla, maybe we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is where we're going to start when we're talking about contextualizing compassion fatigue. We're going to start by identifying this term secondary traumatic stress by kind of first exploring and reviewing very quickly just primary trauma versus secondary trauma. We're looking at primary traumas. What we're talking about here is just our firsthand experiences of any traumatic event, right? And so examples of that might include if you've suffered a personal loss that was traumatic in your own personal life, any kind of adverse childhood experiences that you may have experienced, those are things that we would label as primary traumas, right? They also, so secondary trauma, this is going to be caused more by the indirect exposure to trauma. So the retelling of these primary traumas through the use of images or videos or writings, which is kind of like what I'm doing in my work right now. A lot of the folks that I'm working with are exposed to trauma through the use of videos, right? And so that would be considered secondary trauma. And the accumulation of that, or the ongoing implications of that, leads to secondary traumatic stress, which results in emotional distress for an individual. So just really quickly, there's a primary trauma, secondary trauma, so direct, indirect, and then all of that, the accumulation that would lead to that. So.
Cool. And so let me talk to you a little bit about burnout, right? And so the way that we're understanding burnout in the context of this presentation is not like, man, I've heard too many stories about trauma. I just got to go. I'm burnt out. I can't do this work anymore. And with regard to specific trauma, like doing trauma work, burnout in our understanding here, and for the purpose of this presentation, is just going to be a result of general occupational stress, right? So we can get burnt out from doing any kind of job. Burnt out from changing tires, painting houses, doing anything, right? Delivering food, making food. We can get burnt out in any way, right? From any job. But essentially what it's characterized by, like, just physical and emotional exhaustion, right? And feeling like we're not being maybe as valued, or we don't have a deeper sense of accomplishment that might have brought us into the field. It's not necessarily that our worldview has changed, or that the way that we care about others is threatened. It's just something like it's just repetitive work. Just can't do this anymore. We're not finding like any kind of value in that. And so if we're thinking about it that way, like the resolution of burnout can be essentially just changing jobs, right? Just finding something different to do. And so from there, what we want to do is really dive a little bit deeper into this notion of compassion fatigue. And I think a good way to kind of understand that is to think about this is empathic strain, right? So Buddhists framed compassion fatigue as empathic strain because they believe that people cannot really run out of compassion, just like they can't run out of love, right? We always have the capacity to do that. But what's happening is that our ability to be empathic towards others is hurt, right? So compassion fatigue is not diagnosed. It's not related to any specific psychological disorder. What it is, it's just the gradual erosion of things that keep us connected to our empathy and to our hope, and that's for empathy or hope for ourselves and for others people too. It's been compared to helping a friend like through the world's longest breakup, right? Francois Mathieu of the Tend Academy, I highly suggest that you touch base with her, that you engage with some of her content. She's great. She's a very dynamic speaker, and her passion in life, or at least one of them, is helping people through this world of compassion fatigue. And she's described as helping somebody through the world's longest breakup. And so it's essentially like helping somebody with the same problem over and over and over again, where you're just kind of exhausted and you get to the point where you can't deal with it anymore, or you're handling that same problem, many people with that same problem. So some of the different signs of compassion fatigue are just we might become like a little bit toxic, right, to people that we work with, or we might start to be more prone to work errors, and we lose a respectful stance to the people that we care for, whether it's our clients, of our students, or just the people who we're looking after, right? And sometimes that even looks like not being as careful as we can with confidential information, just because we're not being as mindful as we should be about that stuff. Anything else you want to say about that, Carla, before we move on?
No, and we'll go ahead and put the name of that, the author of the book we're talking about in 10. I saw a chat for that, so we'll put that in there in just a moment.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, great. So moral distress, again, another word in that word bank that we were talking about earlier. So moral distress is really it's actually a concept that was taken from the field of medical ethics, and it can be defined as something that happens as a result of policies or routines that kind of continually conflict with our beliefs or our values. So if we're looking at this through a medical lens, for example, that might look like, an example might look like a DNR order, right? A do not resuscitate order that is being implemented by a nurse who may fundamentally sort of disagree or not agree with this, with the order, or it just goes against, moral principles. Another example might be, we're seeing a lot of, starting to see in the research, the impact of moral distress in fields like social work, right? Keeping a child in a home that you believe is unsafe for them, right? So the continual sort of going up against values and belief systems can lead to something called a moral distress.
Yeah. Something I want to share about moral distress right now is something that came up with my wife, and especially since we have a lot of educators on right now. What I wanted to do is kind of share a story with you. So my wife was telling me about this post, and she shared it. Something on, I think it was on Facebook or something. But this post really resonated with her because she was saying that right now is a time of the year at schools where classrooms are really gelling, right? They're really grooving. Like we're end of the year, we've kind of made it through the beginning of the school year, and this should be the time where we're really connecting with each other and really like just enjoying being with each other and finding that that gel, right, with one another as teachers and students. And so this is a very hard time, right? It's a very hard time for people to do that, where they can't be with their students or their coworkers enjoying that time of the year. So it's very real, man. It's very real. What I want to do too is talk a little bit about vicarious traumatization as the last part of this stop part. Um, so vicarious traumatization, if we're thinking about this whole continuum, vicarious traumatization is really something that's really most important to address and assess, because when we've been exposed to all these different secondary trauma events, and we're living the life of a helper or helping professional or caregiver, educator, if we hear stories about our students or our clients trauma experiences time and time again, well, then it's going to affect us, right? And so it gets to the point for some of us that it affects our worldview. And so that is what's known as a vicarious traumatization. So we may start to think like the world isn't safe anymore, like there aren't any safe people out there, or we got to be very careful about the way that we interact with others in the world because it's not safe. This came up when we were talking with nurses at a trauma unit, right? The nurses would say, like, I can't let my kid drive in the car anymore with their friends because I've seen so many people come through the ER after they've experienced this horrific accident. And so, that starts to shape the way that we see the world and see our place in the world. And so those symptoms of vicarious traumatization mimic those of post-traumatic stress disorder. So where we might see like exaggerated startle response, or we might start having intrusive thoughts or nightmares. And so if we find that stuff is happening with us, we definitely want to make sure that we're getting help that we need from professionals. And if nothing else, checking in with somebody who you think might be able to help you out with that. Anything else, Carla, about that?
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. I think what we'll do, let's breathe, bro. You take us through that.
Yeah. So let's take a pause and just take a deep breath in. Do that one more time. Cool. All right. We're going to talk about the importance of that here in just a second, but we're going to move to this next part. We gave a lot of threw a lot of definitions at you. Like Fred mentioned, there's a whole body of research and understanding of those things. And so we just wanted to provide a baseline, but I absolutely love this quote that's up here. Fred and I think in mostly all of the presentations, Fred, we don't go without putting this here. Especially when we're talking about compassion fatigue. But this is a quote by Naomi Rachel Remen, and she's a clinical professor in family and community medicine. And it says, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. For me, what this quote really invokes is a sense of calm for me as a helper, because It really is saying that if you're in the caring business in any capacity, you're going to be affected by that work. And essentially, that is the cost of caring, right? But it also points to the fact that we're not alone. And it normalizes and allows us to sort of create healthy expectations of ourselves when we're in this work and even of others. And so that impact may look differently for each of us, and it will look differently, but nonetheless, we are going to be affected by it. So Fred and I, we put this in here just as a very intentional pause to just sort of recognize that the work is needed. Fred, what about you?
I think you hit it right on the head, man. I know that sometimes when we've presented this to folks, especially like newer folks in the field, they come with this attitude like, not me. I'm like, yep, yes, you too, right? And the more that we can be honest with that, I think the better for us. And of course, that's to say, like, not everybody's going to be affected the same way, right? But we're going to be affected by it on some level. Sherry, do you want us to take any questions or anything right now before we move on to the next section?
Fred, there was a question in the Q&A about, hi there, I'm an occupational therapist and I work directly with families and patients in acute hospital settings. I am wondering if vicarious traumatization has a higher risk of suicide or self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah, so yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? So what we're doing is, like, we have these elevated states that we're living in if we're experiencing this vicarious traumatization, right? And so since they mimic those symptoms of PTSD, it's definitely something we want to make sure that we're checking in with a professional on to. If nothing else, right, just make sure that we're keeping ourselves kind of within the right mind frame that we need to be working with folks. So.
Yeah, and also if I could just add too, if we're going to look at this, the research is kind of pointing to this fact that, when we're experiencing the vicarious traumatization, because you can have and create diagnoses like PTSD, we're really thinking about that as being on that higher end of the spectrum, right? And so you are reaching out and seeking services for that. That's something that you definitely don't leave unattended. So that's a good question.
Thank you. All right. Shall we move on, Sherry, then?
Yep.
Okay,
that was the question. So.
All right, cool. All right, so we're going to provide you with a tool right now, right? So this is a wellness wheel. There's many out there. There are many out there, right? So, but we're going to use this one to kind of help frame what Carl and I are talking about. So SAMHSA, so the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they've come up with this eight dimensions of wellness. And so what it looks at is these different components of our being, to make sure that we're keeping an eye on, like, how we're staying in check with ourselves in these different parts of our lives, right? So if we take a look at those different things, we recognize, like, a lot of these are being affected by the pandemic, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's relating to how we interact with each other spiritually, or how we're interacting with each other physically. That's going to affect our own capacity to be well, right? And so, like, for example, we definitely have heard a lot of news about how the financial strain is going to be prevalent. And so what does that do for our occupational wellness and our financial wellness, right? And of course, with our if thinking about our environmental wellness, that's definitely something where our settings have changed, right? How are we going to be operating in, like, this new kind of reality, this new narrative that we're telling each other? So what we would encourage you to do is take a look at these different components, right? And be present, right? Be present with how they might be affecting you with the current circumstance, but also be cognizant, right? Be cognizant of the fact that some of these dimensions might even be improving, right, with the current state. And before we even started the call, like, we were talking with Sherry about like this new skill set that people have gained, right? For example, like the Zoom calls, right? Being able to recognize different ways to be creative, right? Or expanding your skills and knowledge, right? There's definitely ways that we are learning to engage with other folks and engage with ourselves that's different and can be fulfilling too. Anything else you want to share about this, Carla?
Yeah.
Okay. Carla, go ahead and take us through that then.
Yeah. So one of the things that Fred and I have used in our presentations, in our trainings before, is this common stress reactions worksheet, and this is taken from Charles Figley, the Institute of Charles Figley, and he's has a body of knowledge on trauma. And how we've used this is, you want to take those dimensions of wellness that are mentioned here, and kind of run through this list, right? And again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some quick examples. And what you want to do is go through that list and start annotating maybe if you're experiencing some of these things right now, you might just annotate or put a little check mark by one. And then at the end, kind of find a number score for each dimension. And really you create the awareness around it. You have this number that you can now have a baseline for, and just work off of that. You may even notice, hey, I'm actually doing really well in this particular area, and that's your strength, right? Or you may find some areas where you're maybe needing to pick up a little bit of being more mindful of those things. So just again, we'll have this worksheet at the end, a link for it, that if you want to use this as a tool. It's just one of the many tools that are out there, and so we wanted to show it and share it with you guys today.
Yeah. And I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead of it, because Carl and I, we didn't talk about this before. But one way that we've used this same sheet is by inviting different teams, right, to fill it out together, right? So what they would do is everybody in the team has their own sheet, right, with these common stress reactions. And then essentially what they're doing is just doing like a self-inventory, like how many cognitive stress reactions am I experiencing? How many behavioral? How many spiritual? How many physical, right? And so once you have that information for yourself as an individual, well, then you might combine like everybody's sheet on your team and see, wow, as a group, we're really struggling with our cognitive stress reactions, or wow, we're really struggling with our physical stress reactions right now. What can we do to help support one another through this too, right? So it just takes a deliberate effort to engage in that for yourself as an individual, but also takes a sense of like safety to be that vulnerable with your team members too. So it's one way that you can do it, right? And it's one way that Carl and I have used that for our teams and groups that we work with pretty good success. So
yeah.
So let's move on for now, and we're gonna talk about this one specific dimension of wellness, and we're gonna really tackle this whole social dimension of wellness, because, and for good reason, right? Because if you look at here, so Dr. Bruce Perry, who's the senior fellow at the Child Trauma Academy and a renowned neuroscientist and expert on attachment, he says that the niche human beings have evolved into was such that the only way that we survived in the natural world was by forming relationships, by collaboratively working as a group. Human beings are neurologically meant to be connected to others. So that's especially prevalent now, especially important right now, right? Especially if the narrative that's being thrown at us is the importance of social distancing, right? Well, there are definitely like impacts to that, right? On our own compassion, our own way to be present with each other. And so what we're going to do is look at different ways that we can be social with each other while still being physically distant. If you look at the stress reaction that's tied to the social interpersonal wellness, these are them, right? It's isolation from friends. It's a decreased interest in intimacy or sex, feeling lonely, right? Intolerance. So if you look at this, right, with the whole physical distancing mandates that we're under, a lot of these things are being prescribed to us right now, right? So we're actually like on some level like inducing some levels of stress reaction just by the way that we're being asked to live. And so we should all take comfort in knowing that this is normal. Well, what we're experiencing is normal, right? And even if we take a look at that last part, intolerance of group process, man. So think about all the different group processes that have changed, right? The group processes that we experience in our home right now. And so that group process has changed, right? And then our group process at work has changed. Now we're looking at that differently. Now our group processes in our cities have changed, our communities have changed, and how group processes are different from state to state or country to country, right? So it's okay, man. It's okay for us to kind of be a little bit tired of that. It's okay for us to be tired of that. But the sooner that we can recognize that, the sooner that we can move on. Anything else, Carla, here?
Yeah, that's good, Fred.
All right. You got this, bro.
Yeah. So if we're going to start to take a look at the introspective piece of this, interpersonal part of this is there's a framework that is called the window of tolerance, and it was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel, and he's a child psychiatrist. This tool, what it's designed to do is really to just create some awareness and bring some awareness to our emotional responses that we have, like those common stress reactions that were highlighted previously. And the idea here is that, you know, every day we're all sort of kind of regulating in this, you know, going up and down in our emotions, right? And how we feel in our experiences and things like that, what we're feeling internally. And again, what just to piggyback on what I was saying, all the external factors that are happening right now. And so the goal is always to, with this window of tolerance, is to really find where that sweet spot is and kind of stay in that optimal operating space. And so if you were to spike up or down in any range of that, there's different, you know, hyper arousal might occur when you're spiking up in emotions and regulation, and then going down on that scale might be talking about hypoarousal, right, which is going to mimic more of the freeze responses. Just as an example, we put a few ideas up on the slide here that might kind of represent what that looks like for this, seeing in this context of interpersonal connectedness. And so if I'm in that really optimal zone, I'm really doing some things really well, right? I'm communicating effectively with family members. I've got appropriate boundaries in place, and those are all healthy. And then, you know, going up or down, if you look at those examples there, those might be some examples of when we're starting to reach warning zones, or even in that danger zone where we're starting to kind of act out of character as it pertains to interpersonal relationships. And so this is just a framework, and we like using this, and it's good to use so that you can sort of create your own language for what that looks like. What else, Fred?
No, that's good. And like you said, like, it's going to look different for everybody. So this is actually another tool that you can use, right? And so be very intentional, like when you're filling this thing out, right, to make sure that yours looks like yours, right, and yours alone. Because like if this is mine, that's not Carla's, and that's not Sherry's, right, and that's not Anna's. Just make sure that you're being intentional about that. And we want to make sure that we're bringing awareness to the fact that people with lots of trauma or stress may have a smaller window of tolerance, right? So they may be operating in this different range here, right? They're like ups and downs, but because of their experience with trauma and stress, that window of tolerance gets to be like smaller, right? The good thing is, right, that when we're doing well, we'll have a larger window of tolerance, and that might even change from day to day, right? Day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour. Like this morning, maybe my window of tolerance was that small, right? But now that I've woken up and kind of here with you guys and feeling a lot better about that, then my window of tolerance is here, right? It's a little bigger. So we want to make sure that we recognize and that we have some control over that. And what we're going to do is take a look at some of that stuff now. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, Sherry, is there anything that we want to address before we move on?
No questions right now.
All right, let's go, Carla.
Cool. All right, cool. All right, so we're kind of moving into that go part. This is the fun part for me, because it really is a starting point to explore like the now what, right? How do we start pulling all of that together? And there's a beautiful quote by an author and renowned speaker on self-care, and her name is Eleanor Brown. And the quote goes like this, quote, "When you take time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel," end quote. I love that. The overflow is where it all begins. It's, taking time to check in with ourselves is how we practice self-compassion. And so we need to start there before we can even think about how we can practice compassion with others, right? And so starting with ourselves, starting with this vessel that is our bodies. And so practicing movement, right? Whatever that looks like for you, whatever that looks like for your abilities, right? So practicing movement and staying connected there. Mindful nutrition is also going to be super important to taking care of ourselves. And again, according to your abilities, wherever you can start small, and being sure to do that with some mindfulness and intention. In almost every corner of the research on the mind and body connection, it's super important. The importance of breath work is very important, which is why Fred and I have been taking you through that intentionally through this webinar. And so it's important to stay connected to that. And integrating gratitude with a daily ritual That might even look like, you know, when you're washing your hands, right? In light of recent situations, I know a lot of us have been practicing hand washing a lot. Even doing something like that, that becomes repetitive, integrating some type of gratitude in there. So I'm washing my hands and I'm finding gratitude for 3 people in my life today, or at every time you're prompted to do so. And then we're looking at limiting our media and trauma inputs. Again, pointing back to that window of tolerance that we were talking about, the importance of just creating awareness around what our capacity is, what can we hold, and it's going to look different from day to day, maybe even moment to moment. And so those are going to be important tools to utilize for practicing our self-compassion first.
Yeah, I think the other thing we want to say just about that, like even the media inputs, and that's just not the news stuff, right? It's thinking about what are we watching. Like my wife and I, we started watching the Walking Dead, which is probably not a good idea, like right now. But we started watching The Walking Dead, and like, man, okay, we got to take a break from this stuff, right? Because just so many things are stimulating our minds in ways that we don't need to be stimulated right now. Let's take a look at the importance of being careful with rumination, like the woulda, coulda, shoulda, and fortune telling, right? Which is essentially like casting blame. If we're doing woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff, like I should have done this, man. This is not the time to do this, man. If only I would have done this. Like we're just adding more undue stress and guilt to ourselves right now. So let's be careful when we catch ourselves doing that. And if we're talking about like fortune telling in the sense that we know it's going to be horrible again, we're just waiting for the next flare up, or we're not ready to do this stuff. There's a difference between doing like that kind of fortune telling and preparing rationally too, right? So just make sure that we're being intentional about the way we're handling that stuff. Carla and I, when we did that presentation with the trauma nurses and doctors, one of them talked to us about this practice of scrubbing in and scrubbing out, which is a great transition ritual, right? And that's what we're trying to do too, like to help us kind of stay focused. For those of us who might have gone to a nurse practitioner or doctor or nurse or helping our medical professional, you may see them from time to time. Like when they come into the room with you, they're intentionally washing their hands, right? And then they're there with you. They're present with you and they're talking with you about what's going on. And then when they're ready to move on to the next patient or move on to maybe just to their own personal routine, moving home, they scrub out, right? So that's their way of kind of being present with what's happening in the room and then leaving. And so what we want to do is start to create those kinds of transition rituals too at home, especially if we're working in the same place that we're living, right? So how are we being very mindful about moving from one responsibility to the next, right? And as much as we can honor that transition, right? Because we want to make sure that we're respecting our own time with ourselves and of course with others, the people in our home, or just checking in with people who, if we're living alone, right, checking in with people who we need to be checking in with, and not going back and forth with work emails and those kinds of things. And then the last one that they mentioned for this, like the self-compassion, is connection with others. And so we're going to spend the last part of our workshop talking about this, right? And so I offer this as a tool, and we'll frame it with you guys in a second here. But feel free, if you guys want to play along, you can play along while we're doing this. The way that I presented it to folks was like doing like a teammate check-in, right? So partner with somebody, and then you can either choose to select one color to complete, or you complete multiple colors, or you complete the whole thing. Really, it's up to you, like how you want to do it. Or, you know, some people, I think it was Christine Norton who told me, like the way that she envisioned using it was like if they're on a Zoom call or something, right, then they have the grid view and you just invite somebody to do behavior or answer a question that's related to them inside that corresponds to their placement on that grid, or just create your own way of doing it, right? But what we want to do is spend time talking about like why something like this might be helpful. And the reasons that we're doing that is because we want to make sure that we're being intentional here by providing you guys with things. And even if it's not this tool, it's something else, right? So what we're going to encourage you guys to do is honor like the adventure beliefs, right? So there's 7 adventure beliefs that we operate from as adventure therapists and experiential educators, which are safety, right? Trust, belonging, challenge, enjoyment, effective communication, and empowerment. And so if we're honoring those adventure beliefs, we're helping to make connections with each other in a very defined and intentional way, right? But it also, like doing something like this little game, right, is also helping us to be vulnerable with each other and reaching out to others when we need some help. It's going to be an opportunity to connect with people in new ways, right? And recognizing that, helping somebody recognize that they have value of their own too. Just helping to bridge these connections, making sure we're strengthening relationships. You have anything else you want to say about something like this, Carla?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Okay. Let's do this last one here too, then, right? So this is another tool that I've presented, and we'll talk to you a little bit about what we think this might, how this might work, right? So essentially, when we're looking at these different things, right? So we're asking ourselves to slow down a bit, right? So this is a time for us to be mindful and reflecting about what's happening with our lives recently. And so if we're thinking about these 6 different prompts here, we're helping to ground ourselves in goodness, right? And especially goodness that's grounded in connection to other people. And so the more that we can make connection with those things for ourselves, the more we're going to be able to kind of fill up our own bank, right? So if we're taking time to focus on the positive, we're putting money in the bank, right? Because we're going to need it, right? So the next time that we need to tap into something that's really drained, like because we're feeling really drained, we're celebrating what's right with the world, right? It's a concept known as like appreciative inquiry or appreciative inquiry, or we're essentially doing that. Look at what's going right with the world, right? And making things better from there. Another thing that this kind of tool does is it helps to put things into perspective, right? So we're kind of understanding like where we're at right now and recognizing that it's not going to be like this forever, right? Like Carla and I were, as we're preparing for the presentation, we're talking, man, I can't wait to have a double beverage with you, right? when this thing ends, right? Because yeah, we got to make sure that we're recognizing the potential for goodness as we're moving on. And we're in the same time, like we're helping to spread gratitude for the people in our lives, right? And what are the different ways that we're doing that, right? Because that's important, making sure that we're spreading gratitude, because hopefully that kind of thing is reciprocal too. So if we're helping people understand that we're grateful for them, they in turn may be doing that too, even if they're not using those same words. And the last part of that is just recognizing personal growth, right? So like we were talking about the dimensions of wellness earlier, we want to make sure that we're taking the time to think about how we're evolving as people, right? As individuals, but also as social people and people that are connected with others in this world. Anything else you want to share about that, Carla?
Good, I'm good.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's think about this, right? So that's kind of like where we're at with the stop, look, and go stuff. If we were going to think about, this is kind of something that developed like when we're putting these slides together. It's like, so where do we go from here? And so what we would do is offer you is kind of like homework, right? To think about anything that you've learned, of course, anything that maybe something that you just revisited during our presentation, tap into that stuff. But if you want to kind of look at other things moving forward, look at these concepts of post-traumatic growth, because I think that's important right now too, that we recognize that we have the capacity to be even better than we were before this pandemic happened, right before this trauma happened to us. And so what are the different ways that we're growing from this? And if we're thinking specifically about our work as helping professionals, caregivers, educators, as therapists, we want to think about this concept of vicarious resilience, right? And what that is essentially, I get better as a person knowing that I'm involved in the story that somebody else is telling them about themselves as it becomes stronger, right? So if I'm working with a client who's come and experienced all these horrific traumas, right? But I recognize that they're slowly maybe growing and changing and seeing things differently. Well, then I start to feel empowered by their growth. And so how can we tap into that, and how are we being deliberate about that? So that way we can help to continue to fill our vessel, right? Make sure that we have that capacity for compassion for other people. And that last one that I came across was exquisite empathy, right? So that's a concept that was new to me when we're doing this research. But essentially what that is like, how do you demonstrate empathy, like dive headfirst into these relationships with your students, with your clients, with your caregivers, right? Being empathic, but also being able to step back out, right? Because there's been research that says, like, if you're too empathic, if you do that time and time again, then you're not really able to take care of yourself. But if we're looking at this concept of exquisite empathy, right? You look at ways that you can do that, but you have to have guidelines set forth that are really helping you prepare for that kind of relationship with a client or with a student. You got to know your boundaries. You got to know exactly like where am I going to, how am I going to tap into like my spiritual needs or our emotional needs if I'm going to get down in the depths of this relationship with a client or with a student. How am I going to get back up? And if that's not working right, okay, what do I need to do something? What can I do differently? So those are just some concepts that I would encourage you guys to kind of think about moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, too, if I know that we have a few educators on here. We used to put in our presentations Brene Brown's clip on empathy, which is a really another great resource. It's on YouTube. It's a really short video that kind of just talks about what it is and how you can just stay empathic without just be empathic. So Brene Brown's video on empathy is a great resource as well.
Yeah, it talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and how can really like be true to our empathic selves if that's what we're saying we're doing.
Cool.
So these are some of the resources that we talked about, and we'll probably put some more up later on. But definitely, like, these are some things that we use. Tend Academy, again, I can't speak its praises high enough. Francois Matthews is great. Carl and I waited about 3 years, I think, to go to do her training in Canada. Yeah. And so, yeah, and it was well worth it. But yeah, so these are some of the resources that we would encourage you guys to use. Anything else, Sherry?
Fred and Carla, thank you so much. This was amazing. Such great information, and appreciate you all putting it together. And yeah, awesome. Thanks for all the resources too. We will share those with everybody who registered for the conference or for the webinar, and also share them on our website. So those will be available to you all who are with us.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Go connect. Bye.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.